Welcome to Fynders Keepers, the vodcast powered by Asset Find. Here, we talk with the people shaping the future of global financial asset recovery, from industry veterans to technology innovators. Each episode uncovers new insights, real-world challenges, and the emerging tools helping companies locate and recover billions in unclaimed financial assets worldwide. If it touches finance, data, or discovery, we're talking about it here. This is Fynders Keepers, where every conversation uncovers something worth finding. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's Fynders Keepers podcast, and our episode is entitled "The Early Bird Gets the Refund." I am very excited to be joined by Will Nemirovsky, who is the co-founder and CEO of Sparrow, and I wore blue in honor of Sparrow. For those of you who don't know, Sparrow is a fintech platform on a mission to return the close to $80 billion in unclaimed money to the Americans that it actually belongs to. He's a Wharton grad who got so frustrated trying to recover his own lost money that he built a company to fix the problem. Classic founder origin story. Welcome, Will. Such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Will, you built Sparrow after your own frustrating experience trying to recover lost money. Walk me through this. How much was it? What was the process? Did you get it back? Tell me a little more about it.
I'm embarrassed to admit that at this point, I don't even remember all the details because it was quite a while ago. But from what I do remember, it felt a little clunky, and that's sort of, still often what we're seeing today. I had to do sort of a search on a portal that I wasn't super familiar with, and then I found I had $19. That was it. From an AT&T overpayment when I was 18. Evidently, a notice was sent to an address where I no longer lived because I'd gone to college. So basically, I submitted a request, and then what we see with a lot of the portals, we sort of get an email later, and you have to follow it up, and then there's a second follow up, and you submit all of these things, and then yes, eventually I did receive a check to my mailbox.
And so, it was less about the amount that you were going to recover, more, I guess, about this epiphany that there's got to be a better way, and imagine if the amounts are even greater.
Yeah, totally. Because obviously that sort of $19 is not really, the norm. The norm is actually quite a bit bigger. What we see here is that on average, the claim sizes for an individual in the US, period, whether they've been reached out to and assisted or not, is about $2,000. Which is,
Wow, that is surprising, very surprising.
yeah, yeah. And, that's sort of how most people feel about this. They're a little bit shocked, almost even disbelief that there could be sort of like this amount of money out there. It feels a little bit too good to be true, and that really becomes sort of part of the challenge, is that explaining that it actually is true.
So I want to talk about the Sparrow team for a second. It's a fascinating team. So if I make sure I got this right. So your chief of staff, Matt, he did Peace Corps service in Zambia and also was a congressional caseworker before joining Sparrow. Then your CTO won engineering awards at Penn. You came from the crypto and investment world. This is an unusually eclectic founding team for a fintech startup. Was it intentional, or did you just want to keep hiring the most interesting person in the room?
Yeah, so those backgrounds are all correct. And really, I think sort of the way it all came together is that, when building a team, I think you want people who are, capable of sort of bringing different things to the table, filling different roles. And, both Matt and Jack are great at a whole bunch of things that I could never do myself. And I think that's what makes the team really, really great. Matt's background, I think sort of there's a reason that it looks the way it is, and it's because he loves helping people, and he sort of loves working on cases for people. So, that empathy he has for our clients, it really comes off when he speaks to people on the phone. They love chatting with him. All of our reviews are about, I love Sparrow. Matt was so great. They never mentioned me, but that's okay. That's what Matt is for, because he loves doing this. And likewise, when I talk to my friends and my family, they say, "Hey, I looked at your website. It looks great. Like, that's awesome." And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, Jack built it, so that's what I think makes the team really really good together.
So it sounds like you're really complimentary, with respect to your skills. And I think, I really love how you touched on there is such a human side to this whole thing. And it's really, it's quasi philanthropic. Of course, you collect a fee, which we'll talk about, but it must be pretty inspirational to sort of see the reactions of many of your clients in going through this. And it's what I like to call sort of a win-win. And so back to you for a second. So you studied finance and economics at Wharton. Now, did any of your classmates, when they heard your startup pitch, say like, Will, you could be doing so many things. Why did you decide to chase lost money? And how do you explain this when you're at gatherings or events or that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned classmates. So actually, my co-founder Jack was a classmate of mine. So that's how he and I met. So there's at least one person who the pitch clearly resonated with quite strongly. I sort of explained to him very very early on. He and I teamed up sort of 1 month into the process, and I sort of explained this to him. He, like a lot of people, sort of scratched his head. He's like, "Lost money? What are you talking about?" And I'd be like, "No, no, 100 billion, 1 in 6 Americans. It's a real thing. Is like the awareness is the issue." And then that night, he texted me. He said, "Hey, I just went online and I checked in New Jersey, and my fiance has lost money. What is this? This is like a real thing." I'm like, "Yeah, it's a real thing." So that was one person who it certainly resonated with. Um, a lot of the other people, still sometimes there's like a communication battle for sure, but I'm sort of used to it. The background at Penn is much more pre-professional, so there's a lot of bankers and consultants is sort of the typical pathway here. But that was never really a good fit for me. So straight out of college, I moved to San Francisco to go work on a Bitcoin startup, and maybe now that's slightly more mainstream than it was 5 years ago, but at the time it was you're going to go live in California and work on magic internet money. So
Right.
I'm used to it. That's part of the fun.
Well, and I think I'm sure that your time working with Bitcoin is going to serve you as digital assets are just becoming so much more prevalent. It's a big deal when it comes to asset recovery. So I'm sure that was not by accident. So when you're giving the pitch, you're talking to people about what you do, and Sparrow and other different sites state that close to 1 in 6, 1 in 7 Americans have lost money that they don't know about, and you built a tool to find it automatically. Now, do you find that and the awareness is still shockingly low? We find it also on the corporate side to some degree. Um, so, as a fintech founder, knowing that there's this low awareness, does it excite you? Does it frustrate you? And do you think it's more of a sort of a marketing problem, or is it a trust problem?
Really, I think it's both. I think it's both of these
Mhm.
things for sure. Like the first thing is the awareness, the marketing, if you will, because so many people don't know about this, and that's sort of the part that is often mind, just boggling. That there's you reach out to somebody to tell them, "Hey, you have 20, 30, $100,000," and the first thing is, "No, I don't." So that's for sure sort of like the top obstacle that you need to start with, and then of course, sort of because of this, the next thing becomes, the trust building. A lot of people will understandably sort of be skeptical of this because they think if, there must be some sort of system for if they have this money, it's going to come back to them. And you have to explain, there is, and this is the system. So, we like to really lean into sort of that more personal touch. Um, you know, a lot of our clients have left us reviews, which are positive. So we'll point to those sorts of things. We're of course heavily regulated, so we point to our licenses as well, and sort of just bit by bit you help reassure them.
So at Asset Find, we specialize in corporate asset recovery, and I mean sometimes we can recover as much as many as millions of dollars, which again sounds mind-boggling. But when you talk about the scale of large global corporations, it's not
Hmm.
surprising. Of course, on the individual side, it's not as great, but it matters more. It's all relative, right? So you've had customers that you've recovered, $98 for upwards to $4,000. You say the average across the board is about 2,000. Top of mind, can you think of one or two real stories that stick with you and sort of, how that sort of came about and the reaction of the person?
Yeah, we have a couple that really sort of like stick out as, oh, wow, this was really fun. This was really gratifying. Of course, at the end of the day, really, we just want to, sort of, it should be a win-win. We want to feel that way for our clients. Obviously now we have a little bit more experience, so we understand how these things work a little bit more deeply. But about a year and a half ago, we were still figuring out, what all these things meant. And we had a client who had some funds with a reported value of about $4,000, which was enough to get them excited, enough to get us excited. So we decided to work together. And then at the point of getting that claim approved, what we found out for the first time was that these were reported shares that had since appreciated in value by about 10x. So we found out that this claim for
Wow.
4,000 was actually 40,000. So we were excited, and then we called the client to tell him the good news, and he was just over the moon. So that was a lot of fun.
Wow, I mean, talk about a windfall. And he was probably would have been excited enough to just get the 4,000 he barely knew he had, let alone, it's almost like winning the lottery, right?
Yeah, it's like yeah, sort of twice we got to give him that good news. So yeah, that was a lot
Yeah.
of fun.
So as I understand it, one of the things that Sparrow does is you actually send physical outreach letters to people when it finds their unclaimed money. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So, in an era where we are just so incredibly skeptical and anything that kind of looks official in our mailbox, we either think is a bill or it's sent to the wrong person or we don't want to open it, you know, how did you decide that the traditional snail mail process would be something that might work for you?
Um, I think we didn't sort of do it because we thought it was a good idea. We sort of just did it because it was working. And in the early stages of company, try dozens of things every week, and honestly, most of them don't work. And that was our experience as well. So you sort of run these experiments, you find out what does work, and you lean into it. I know it's actually a pretty common tool used in this industry. And I think part of the reason it does stand out for a lot of people is that sort of all of our digital channels have gotten so cluttered. I have, 100 emails a day, and 95 of them are complete garbage, to the point that I have like a filter and a second filter to make sure that I see the things that matter. Even my
Right.
text at this point, I'm getting a ton of texts that like don't actually matter. So I need to make sure I see the text from my parents. It gets buried. I mean, we
No,
obviously
no offense to mom or dad, right? No offense to mom or dad.
yeah. So obviously, we are a tech company. We would love to have more tech channels that resonate. So I think it's just a matter of finding, a way of getting into these mediums that people can actually trust and resonate. Because, of course, if someone gets a notification on their phone from their bank, they might be clicking on it. So there are these trusted signals you can do digitally. And I think it's just sort of, finding these pathways that work.
And I think it's probably one of those things that as Sparrow continues to expand its brand, and the more and more that the name becomes known, people might be more likely, when they receive this, to not think it's a joke and to not think that it's not real. It really is true. So it's probably something over time that I would imagine will get easier and easier to sort of get those emails into the right inboxes without the filters. Um, so you know as great and gratifying as it is, they get their money, and of course, this is a business, so you might need to find a way to collect a fee, and you have the it's your fees contingency based. So it's really the same philosophy as many, even the corporate asset side, operate on. So did you land on that model because it felt ethically right, or is it just because really it's really the only model that can truly work?
Yeah, I think it is pretty standard in the industry, and there's probably a good reason for that one as well. But ultimately, we want to do right by our clients. A lot of the people who are sort of interested in getting this money back, it's because they need it. This money is important to them, and they maybe are not as liquid as they would like to be, or they were recently laid off, whatever it might be. A lot of these people are not in a position where they can be sort of like paying out a fee before they've collected any money. And we sort of want to honor and respect that. So, we want the process to be a clear, easy win for them. Once they get their money, they just pay the fee off the top of that, and it feels much more of a win for everyone.
Now, you mentioned, of course, when people are less liquid, and it's great stories. Many people need this money now more than ever. So it's one of those industries, I think, where it's kind of in opposition of, where the economy is sitting. So in a downturn economy, asset recovery becomes even more important and even on everybody's radar. Are you finding that trend with Sparrow as well?
My intuition is that that probably will be how things look to us. Candidly, our company is still so early that we haven't seen enough market cycles to really see it from both sides. But I mean, you guys have at this point quite a bit more experience than we do. So I guess I'd be curious your opinion on that one, but I don't have that data yet.
Yeah, so that is exactly the case. And I think, on the corporate side, it's one thing, and it is, they become more interested in it as there are troubles, and as there's shift in the economy. I think at an individual level, you will find it is even more probably impactful, because it's at a personal level, and it's, without, I can't necessarily pay my mortgage or pay my bills, and so the hunt for any lost assets becomes more important than ever. So that's, I guess, one good thing in a down economy. So
Yeah, we would
you
never
came from
never root for a down economy, of course, but that's
oh,
very
it would yeah,
a
of
very
course,
useful
yeah,
insight. So we appreciate that.
yeah. So you came from River Financial and Republic, that are both, tech forward financial platforms, and Sparrow is clearly a tech first approach to a problem that, as you mentioned in the beginning, has been handled manually, or through, very paper heavy state portals. So talk to me about your tech and what it actually unlocks that just wasn't possible before.
I think really the biggest thing that we think differentiates our value proposition from a lot of our competitors in the industry is that we do have a lot more sort of tooling, automation, screenings that's built out in a way that's sort of tactical in nature and not sort of reliant on like human manual expertise. And I think what this unlocks for us is that there's a whole bunch of people in this market who have traditionally been ignored because a lot of people who are doing things more manually, they want to go after cases that are really, really big and sort of, worth it for everyone, even if they're spending hours chasing down documents. Whereas on our side, there's people who have, $5,000, $3,000, $1,500, where the process is quite easy for them. And it's also, with all of our tooling, quite easy for us. So there's this whole other segment of the market, millions and millions of people who have the cases that are so small that other people ignore them, where we can actually really come in and help them. So I think that's what makes us different here.
The efficiency on both sides, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about the intergenerational wealth transfer. I mean, I don't think a day goes by without an article being written by somebody about this amazing transfer that is about to come up upon us. So there's an estimated $100 trillion globally that is going to be
Wow.
transferred between generations over the next 20 years. And actually, of the 100 trillion, 84 trillion is in the US alone. So a huge,
Wow. Wow.
huge, and a lot of that includes financial assets that heirs don't even know, exist. So how is Sparrow positioned to meet families at that moment of transition before the wealth, quietly disappears into the unclaimed property system, which might very well happen?
Yeah, a lot of it does. And the thing that we have found, at least with the inheritance cases, actually, is that you sort of get the sweet spot where the money is a little bit bigger, but often the claimant is a little bit younger and often a little bit more appreciative of it because, if they have a lot of independent wealth already, it might mean less to them. So I think really the fun thing about these types of cases is that for some people, this is like legitimately life-changing money they're being reunited with. And I think that's really the segment of the market where you can get that more often. So we love these types of cases. They're definitely a little bit more complicated, but just continue to lean in. There's sort of a lot more edge cases, and again, we want to automate as much as we can. So you have to track down what are like the different types of forms they might need. Does it depend on how big it is? Does it depend on what state it is? And sort of bit by bit, we're just documenting these edge cases and you know trying to automate as much as we can, trying to make sure the client experience is still seamless, even when this on the surface feels like a really complicated legal process. We want to make it, even if it still is behind the scenes, what the client sees should feel clean and easy.
Makes sense. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that over the years as this starts to happen. So, unclaimed property doesn't respect borders. It's a global issue, and you know, you have people that are more active globally now than ever before. So, for someone that's say moved to the U.S. and left assets behind, in their home country, or an American with dormant accounts in a foreign jurisdiction, the recovery path can feel even more daunting. Is cross-border recovery something that's on Sparrow's roadmap? And if so, what do you think that would take to solve it at that scale?
On our long-term roadmap, certainly, but I think it's probably a
Mhm.
long pathway. This is, honestly, one of the pieces of the space that my answer is probably that the solution is not purely a technical one, but actually a legal one. And I think, of course, like the goal of this industry, obviously, is to reunite owners with money. That's what we're all trying to do here. The legislators play a really big role. They've crafted these processes in a way that makes sense based on the job they're doing. And I think the private markets are also sort of, getting involved and trying to help reunite this money with the owners. But ultimately, what we're finding is that sometimes, in order to do our jobs most effectively, we need a little bit more of a dialogue with these legislators. So I think if these two groups can come together, figure out really what the problems are, what the blockers are to getting this money back, and find a path forward together, I think that's how long term this industry can serve even those really complicated international border cases.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's one of those things that when you're talking about different jurisdictions and legislation, it can be challenging enough within one jurisdiction, within one country. But then when you actually, overlay, different countries, different continents, it can become very complicated. My hope also at Asset Find, just like Sparrow, is that the more and more people that raise the profile of asset recovery in general, there might be a lot more people that are going to be trying to lobby to make this a lot easier. So hopefully, collectively, as an industry, we can get to that point where it makes it easier to reunite money with both corporations and individuals. Now, let's talk about sort of the big audacious vision sort of that you have. So you describe Sparrow's mission as building a world where everyone can manage money with confidence, and then you say reclaiming lost money is just the first step. Now, when you look at companies like Asset Find, what Asset Find are doing on the corporate recovery side, do you see a world where the consumer and corporate worlds eventually, converge, where there's this whole ecosystem where unclaimed assets get, recovered and solved from end to end?
I do. I do. I think really when you try to imagine what's the perfect end state of how this industry has been crafted, I think it's an industry in which we're no longer talking about lost money because 100 billion in unreturned assets is it does sound kind of ridiculous. It's a massive number, and the reason it's become that way is because I think there's a lot of obstacles and frictions in like the data pipeline in the recovery process. There's a lot of fractured things going on in different places. Every state's sort of responsible for spinning up their own process. The holders have their complicated workflows. So I think the end state of this is really just a returned money process. And what I mean by that is if assets are found, really sort of in basically every single case, whoever it is, if it's the government or if it's a private company, should be sort of immediately capable of figuring out who this person is, contact them, and getting it back to them without multi-year reporting cycles and multi-month claim cycles and payouts via these sort of payment methods that people might not prefer, like checks. So I think putting all of the right data pipelines in the right places and making this, simply a process of putting the money back in people's bank accounts. That's what the end state should look like.
And I guess, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. So, we have to work together towards this, and every little bit of progress is progress we should all collectively be excited about, as should the companies getting the money as well as individuals.
Certainly a long road ahead, but a lot of progress already made just in the past couple of years. So it's a lot of fun and a lot to look forward to as well.
Well, on that note, that ends our time together today, Will. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, representing Sparrow, and we can't wait to talk to you again soon. And we hope Sparrow will do great things. And thank you to everybody today for listening, and see you soon.
Thanks a lot for having me.